Shall I put my thing in?
Yeah. I hope you're seeing a slide that says the 3,000-year story of the Jewish people.
Yep.
Okay, now we're going to try to plug it in here in the studio, and we'll see if it blows up. We'll reassemble.
Put it in?
Yeah. Okay, so 3,000 year. It's going to be from 1,500 BCE to 1,500 CE. Okay, so I'm going to stop at the end of the late medieval period, and you'll see that that will be enough. So, and I'm going to start at the very beginning, and David Pepper, of course, you interrupt me if I leave anything out. But we start in where Abraham was said to have originated. He follows the rivers up. Somewhere in here is the Garden of Eden, apparently. That's controversial, needless to say. There's a lot of people, even Yemen claims to have the Garden of Eden. And so he works his way down. He goes through what will become the Holy Land, tarries here for a while. But David and I found this great map, a diagram, which we're really suckers for, the graphics. And I'm going to just I'm going to build it one little block at a time because it's almost overwhelming. But that means you're going to have to ignore this stuff up here. This point here, there's a timeline that you'll see in the next slide, and that's 1,500. So that's when
BC, John.
BCE, and 1,500 BCE, and this is when in Egypt the Jews have start collecting their stories, and this is where we're going to say the story begins. I mean, you could go back further to guessing about Abraham, but in terms of the historical record, so 1,500, and the Jewish population builds up in Egypt and really takes off, and then Moses starts the trek to the Holy Land, and then this is when the Jews actually control the Holy Land. So this color coding will be apparent in just a second. And trust me, you need to start slow with this graph. So here's the zooming out. Here's actually your timeline. But you see, by adding this, you get who has control over the land of Israel. Well, up until the time of David, it's Egypt and the Canaanites. But then all of a sudden now Israel has control over the Holy Land, and that continues.
Hey, John, one addition. On the left is the scale in millions. So the peak blue top is about 5 million people. Just important perspective to keep.
Yes, and you'll see that when we move on, that's about the population today, right? Not that
right of Jews. There's another chunk of Palestinians and Arabs.
Yes, of Jews, right? Okay, and Shigeko, we welcome you, and please interrupt me. You know your Bible better than I do, and than most people do. I hope you'll see kind of what we're doing here. If not, I'll catch you up later on. All right, so then the population starts going down. There's some disasters. Assyria comes roaring in, and the population drops, and then Babylonia comes, and there's the exodus to Babylonia. Yes, Aiko.
During the time that Moses' time, and when he pulled the Egyptians, when he pulled the Israelis out of Egypt, the Pharaoh in Egypt was Ramesses II, the greatest Pharaoh of Egypt. Kind of interesting, Ramesses versus God.
Yeah, and
saving it for the decision I'm making. But these are all
mute yourself, Homer.
Quick question.
Yes.
What is the difference between the blue and the yellow or orange?
Okay, so this is when the Egypt and the Canaanites controlled the land of Israel. And this is when the Jews, namely with King David, gained military and political control of Israel. And the Assyrians and the Babylonians robbed them of that. The Persians then are next. You can't see, but that's the Persian. Okay, now this is why I took these little fragments. Has everybody got their seatbelt on? We're going to look at the whole graph. And you can see why I chose to introduce this in baby steps. And so we're only going to go up to 1500. The green, for those that are interested and live in Europe and came from Europe, the green is Jews in Europe. And then the orange continues with the Jews of the Middle East outside of Israel, and we know there was quite a lingering presence there. And the yellow here is Jews in the Americas mostly, and of course mostly United States. And that's the end. Of course, there's a drastic drop off of the greens in the Holocaust. So that's the grand sweep of Jewish history. We're going to stop here today. But other bonuses that you get by looking at this whole graph are world events that fall on this timeline, the Jewish history, historical figures that fall on this timeline, Jewish literature, and then Hebrew years. Okay, so any questions? And here's the map of the world that gives you really the color coding. So a lot packed in here. It was done by Ronan Rabinovici, and I think both David and I both admire him. So I went on to see, well, okay, what's Ronan doing these days? The only thing I could find is him and what's the website where professionals go? Our neighbor works at. Yeah, LinkedIn. So the only thing I could find on the web with him is on LinkedIn. And it was pretty non-specific, but anyway, it's a gift that I appreciate. Yes, Homer.
Well, I just think it would be interesting to superimpose on this, maybe scale differently, the global population. you have that very steep increase in number of Jews between, say, 1700 and 2000. But that's as a percentage of global population, there's a similar very steep increase in the number of people on the planet.
Yeah.
So
fair enough.
Just to put it in context.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, onward and forward, I hope. Yeah, here's another a little bit simpler thing to answer Susan's question. So 1,500 to 1,000 is Moses. David comes on the scene. And the green is Jewish people living in Israel and ruling themselves. All right, that's the period of the golden age, really. And then the red is Jewish people expelled from Israel and living abroad. That's the Assyrian and Babylonian exile. And the yellow is people living in Israel, but not self-ruled. And that goes on all the way to 1948. So I thought this is interesting, a map. This is supposedly Moses' pathway. I guess this is based on the Bible. The red. The black are traditional ways of getting back and forth between Egypt and the Holy Land. Let's see, the other point I wanted to make. Okay, so here's Mount Sinai. And of course, in the middle, there's 40 years, somewhere in the middle, Moses communicates with God and gets the 10 Commandments. I can't resist a little humor at this point. This is Mel Brooks, his take of this moment in the history of the world. You notice he has 3 tablets. And he drops one of them, and he says, "People of Israel, I have 15, a crash. 10, I have 10 commandments." And you're left wondering what the other 5 were. So when I started doing this 3 years ago, my other audience was my grandchildren. And so I did consult some pretty good summaries for kids. These were a few of the summary statements that came out of there. The land of Canaan, the Canaanites, that's in the Bible. And they eventually reached the land of Canaan after wandering in the Sinai. And then they arrived there around 1250, and after many battles, David defeats Goliath. And we're all familiar with that story. He was a Philistine, but some people say, well, the Philistines are synonymous with the Palestinians. That in itself is controversial. I just can't stop to deal with in detail. I really want to get through a quick overview. So I know I'm leaving a lot out. But this is the land of Canaan. The other interesting people that get conflated are the Phoenicians with the Canaanites. So just bear in mind there is that confusion. Did the Canaanites become the Phoenicians? We don't know for sure. But one interesting thing is the Canaanites did develop an alphabet. one of the first alphabets. That's generally credited to the Phoenicians in modern texts. So here on this map, it's called Palestine, but the people that came here were relatively late arrivals, and I'm sure when you get ethnic historians going to head, the Israelis will point out the background of the Philistines. Here's a little bit more on the Canaanites, an alphabet with 27 letters, and animal sacrifice, the huge cedar trees, the cedars of Lebanon, that is still a thing. But here, Canaan was invaded by the sea peoples. And where are they come from? We'll get to that in just a second. But animal sacrifice, boy, that sounds backward. But remember, animal sacrifice replaced human sacrifice at some point in Asia Minor to the fertility goddess. And this ambitious Italian director, Pasolini, decided he'd tell the story of Medea because Medea, in the land of Colchis, she was considered a sorcerer or a witch, if you will. And one of her duties was to preside over human sacrifice as Queen Medea. In this movie, they went big time. They got Maria Callas, a famous soprano, to play Medea. And we've seen very interesting productions of Medea without the human sacrifice. But this was a version of the original story. And this is the human sacrifice. And you can imagine that the story of Jesus has interesting similarities to this fertility sacrifice that happened in the springtime, around the time of Easter. I'm just interested and struck by the connections in history and the coincidences in history, and it's to discuss and argue, and that's one reason we do this session. So the sea people were probably became the Philistines. And what were the sea people? They were people that were pushed out of Greece by the Mycenaeans, which is an Indo-European tribe that came down around the invention of iron. So there's been a lot of theorizing. Boy, there sure was a sudden increase in violence around the discovery of iron. And we can understand how that might be. But here, the movement of people in response to the Mycenaeans. And note that when Homer, the other Homer, the Homer that Homer's going to talk about when he does his summary of the Iliad, he was writing about an event that took place centuries before his life, which was in around 700. So he was probably writing about the response to the introduction of iron. So the sea peoples, being either the Mycenaean themselves or being forced out by the Mycenaeans, take to boat and wind up landing in look at this, Gaza. Gaza is right in the middle of where the Canaanites were from. So there's a lot of connections in history that are interesting. Obviously, I could spend a lot more time talking about this graph, but I do want to get to 1500. So the Sea Peoples, also known as the Raiders of the Mediterranean, they have these ships. They fight with the Egyptians. This is a battle between the Sea Peoples and the Egyptians. Another depiction of what that battle might have looked like. And in summary, this is what this book illustrated for children. It always gives a summary of the timelines, and it goes from the land of Canaan, from the Egyptians to the Canaanites themselves being invaded by the Sea Peoples. The Egyptians defeat the Sea Peoples, and then the Sea People become the Philistines, settling in southern Canaan. So I'm throwing a lot at you, I know, but here is an interesting map taken from an animation, which I like to illustrate and visualize what we're talking about. So I made a slide of this animation. And so here's Philistine. And then when David comes into power, you have a united Israel and Judea. United Israel and Judea. We can already see the Assyrian Empire threatening, and they'll finally break through around 700 BCE. And here are the Phoenicians clothing themselves off. And then another summary slide of the rival of the Philistines. They battle with Saul for the control of the highlands, and it's finally Saul's son David that pushes them back. But here you see a map of those battles. And David pushing back. So when Assyria conquers Jerusalem, and you get the first Exodus, a lot of the Philistines then move up. So this is an interesting schematic of the geography of the Holy Land. And we did, when Iko and I arrived in Tel Aviv from Tehran, of all places, in 1971, it was kind of like we were back home. Benvenuta Street in Tel Aviv had outdoor cafes, which we hadn't seen for almost 9 months. A nice place to have coffee. But what we were immediately impressed with is how small it was, the shorter distance from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. First of all, from the coast to the rising of the foothills was only 7, 8 miles, and then another 30 miles. So you're not dealing with huge distances from the coast to the Jordan River. And a river is a generous term. It's not actually that big a river compared to the rivers we're used to. So it's only after the Assyrians come in and defeat the Israelites that the Philistines move up there. So clearly, the Jews had control of Jerusalem way before the ancestors of the Palestinians. Okay. And here's this timeline again, just to catch our breath. And
Hey, John, I
see
have a
what
spoiler alert, but can anybody guess who the Philistinians become? Right. So the Philistines are thought to be the origin of the Palestinians. And it's just interesting to keep that in perspective, because I think the reason, and John, thank you for letting me interrupt, but we spent a lovely few hours yesterday talking about this. And the
Yep.
whole point is to really understand what's going on today. And there's another horrific thing. I guess a hospital got hit in southern Gaza, and they're saying 500 people may be dead. Probably an Arab missile that went off track.
Oh, gee.
Anyway, sorry for but anyway, thank you, John.
Okay, sure,
Well,
David.
while we're stopped, I have a question and I put it in the chat. It bothers me that the history we're taking from was written by people that were writing it 2 centuries after it happened. Does that bother you guys?
Well, sure. And as I said at the outset, this is just a guess, and it's what we got. I do want to go through this version that is accessible and available. Of course, there are more scholarly works, and there are
Like what are the Palestinians? What does their history say?
Word. I don't know, but Susan, one thing, this is not 2000. This is written. The Bible is 3,500 years old. So a lot of what John is going on, I believe, is biblical history. So
Right,
it's
but
not
he said
history.
that whatever David was writing was written or somebody was writing about David.
Well, David's later, but I mean the Torah itself is older. So and your point is taken that it's a very white, capitalist, Western world slant towards our understanding of history.
Yeah, I that cannot be denied.
Right, totally.
It would be interesting to compare it to the Palestinians' version of history if they kept records.
I'm not sure they did.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Well, we can follow up on that. Thank you, Susan. Good
Right.
points.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We always follow up, and anybody that wants to do that. I have a neighbor that we met at our daily pub who walked by, named Yasmini, who is Palestinian. And I gave her a book recommendation before this last terrible turn of events. So I'm eager to talk with her. The book I gave her, as I think I've mentioned, is the Robert Kaplan book on the loom of time, and Ramsay has used him in his monthly history seminars, and he's a pretty good source. So I'm looking forward to her walking by our pub. She knows when we meet, and she knows we're available to talk. And we'll see what she says, and maybe I could invite her here, Susan, and we could do that. So thanks for bringing that up, and it always stimulates us to look around and get other sources. We are a study group. we're not historians, but we'll study anything. Okay, so just to summarize, this is the one period where the golden period for Israel, where they lived there and ruled there. And we'll get to the diaspora in 1500, our goal, I hope, by the end of the hour. So King Solomon is David's son, and he builds a temple. So these temples have certain characteristics, but the main one is the Ark of the Covenant, which has been lost, but it certainly lives on in the symbolism. David has been kind enough to invite me to his local synagogue in Berkeley, and I've been able to see it live. Of course, you see it depicted many times. And so the first temple, Solomon's temple, and the United Kingdom of Israel and Judea lasts only 96 years. It's not a great long term, but that's what it was. And then it breaks into two kingdoms. Why quarrels? And we know how countries break up because of quarreling. We're right in the midst, it seems, to be breaking up ourselves. But the Assyrians took advantage of the disunity, and you'll see in this timeline, 722, they invade, and then 130 years or so later, the Babylonians destroy the Solomon's temple, the first temple, and take the people of Judea prisoner. The Assyrians had focused on the Israel. So two outside powers. But before that, the divided kingdom again, and it was the kingdom of Judah that had Jerusalem. And you can see those two kingdoms together if you superimpose this map on today's map. Isn't it interesting? You have Gaza, the Philistine state, so certainly the Philistines have a strong argument about Gaza. And Ashkelon, that's still a thing, right? That's still a place in the news, and unfortunately, I think was a target of the recent atrocities. So here we go, and there's that again. The first temple being destroyed by the Babylonians, and it was Nebuchadnezzar that destroyed. But even as they walked to Babylonia, there was immediately a rekindled hope for the reestablishment of an independent Jewish state. And the saying, next year in Jerusalem, we heard this a lot in 1967, the 6-Day War. It was on the lips of a lot of my Jewish friends. So Cyrus the Great comes along, though. He's a little more enlightened, and he conquers Babylonia, and lets the Jews go, and he even helps them rebuild their temple. The ark, though, is lost forever, and I think we're all familiar with the movie about the search for it. So this is Cyrus's path for the Jews to take home. I guess there were a couple of paths the Jews took walking home. And Cyrus was an enlightened leader. He expanded Persia to all of a territory called Iran. And his philosophy was to be kind to the conquered people, which is interesting because that later on is a Roman philosophy too, with their conquered lands. They could become citizens of Rome. And that was not the philosophy, however, of the Greeks. They were nasty colonialists. And by the way, that extended all the way into the Black Sea and what is now the Ukraine, Crimea. And the Egyptians were kind of snobs. The Jews themselves, as conquerors, had been accused of exclusiveness. Later on, that changes, and I forget which book in the Bible it was, but Ike and I took a Bible class over at our local Unitarian church, so we were getting the Unitarian version. But at some point, I forget which book it was. Maybe David can help me. The theology of the Jews becomes more universal. So the Persian, they didn't stop with Jerusalem. They took all of Egypt. And this is 334. And I want to throw in to see what else the Persians brought to the table. They brought Zoroastrianism to the table. And there's remarkable similarities between Zoroastrianism and Judaism. There's a last judgment. There's good versus evil. There is enlightened people on earth that could figure things out, like the prophets and like Zoroaster himself. And it is the Zoroastrians that introduced the concept of angels, which the Christians later will take, but that's not from Judaism. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so Zoroastrianism, Zoroaster himself may have been 1,000 years BCE. But it was Cyrus that featured the tenets of Zoroastrianism. But monotheism was the big thing. Monotheism. So let's just throw a few definitions out. The Torah is the Jewish Bible, the 5 major books, and the monotheism shared with Zoroastrianism. They had an ark, but they lost it. They stopped animal sacrifice, and that's interesting. In light, what I've been saying was the threat of Isaac and Jacob, right? And that's who he was going to sacrifice to God. Interestingly, there's a parallel version of that where Isaac in Islam, where Isaac is going to sacrifice another son. Oh, come on. Somebody will help me. I got a couple of people with their hands raised, so I can take a moment and see if Ishmael is who. Okay. So, yes. Who had their hand up first?
Well, Shigeko's got her hand raised and she should know.
Shigeko. Ishmael? Okay.
I think Ishmael was buying his concubine.
Yeah,
his wife.
Sarah's maid.
Yeah.
What was her name? Oh boy. Okay, so what's the Talmud? That's really blossomed after the destruction of the Second Temple to just keep the theology alive, the civil and the ceremonial law. And synagogues distributed locally took off after the destruction of the temples, because people would gather to sing psalms, which is, of course, the Christians gathered to sing hymns.
Who
So
destroyed
not,
the second temple?
huh?
Who destroyed the second temple?
We're going to get to that. So here's the Second Temple that the Persians facilitated, from opened for business in 516, and another view of what it might have looked like. These are all, of course, all imaginations. And then what happened? Alexander stopped by on his jaunt around connecting the Mediterranean to India, really. And you'll see that the Greeks took a little bit of the theory of Buddhism and meshed it with their own ideology, but Alexander was the mixer. And he came through this area a couple of times. But he didn't stay. But when he died, his kingdom was divided into three parts. It's the Ptolemaic part. He had a general named Ptolemy, and he started the Ptolemaic line of pharaohs in Egypt. And they, of course, controlled Jerusalem. The Seleucids controlled the northern part of the Levant. And all this went along just fine. They were, the temple was partially subsidized for a long time by the Greeks. But then in 167 BCE, this Antiochus said, hold on, we're not going to be worshiping Yahweh anymore. We're turning this second temple into a pagan temple to Zeus. And that touched off a revolt of religious Jews led by Judas Maccabeus. And he went in and he cleansed the pagan ritual from the second temple. And this battle is what's celebrated in the festival of Hanukkah. And then there's the martyrdom of the seven Maccabees in painting. And then along come the Romans to try to get things organized and integrated with all of the Mediterranean. And you'll notice a gap here that's Egypt. But we're very familiar with the story of how Rome tried to expand into Egypt by way of Antony with Cleopatra. And Julius Caesar was in that triangle somewhere. You can see that we're covering a lot of ground, and there's certainly a lot of things we could talk about, but I'm just trying to give the grand sweep. We know from the New Testament about Herod, who was given, as Romans did, was given local autonomy. King Herod was a king that had local autonomy. The Romans, when there was controversy, would send in somebody like Pontius Pilate. When there was a dispute among the members of their empire, and of course that I'm referring to the revolt and the reform movements in Judaism, which is what Christianity is. It's a reform movement within Judaism initially. And what we know of the Second Temple from the New Testament is, of course, Jesus throwing out the money changers. When would that have been? I don't know, 25 CE. But Giotto depicted it, as did Rembrandt. And those of us who are Christians learned that in Bible school. The Second Temple, and the Jews revolted against the Romans finally. It became too oppressive, and they revolted, big pitched battles, and the Romans destroyed the Second Temple. So to answer Aiko's question, 700 roughly. And the Jews fought back, but they couldn't do much. They retreated to a top of a cliff, a sheer cliff, Masada. And the Battle of Masada was suicidal. They knew it would be. But it was to preserve their religion after the destruction of the Second Temple. And here it is today. I know it's a pilgrimage site in Israel. And that's drama, theater, commemorating the rebellion. And so in summary here, the Second Temple is destroyed. Interesting thing is when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, they renamed the province Palestine. That may be the first time that the word Palestine was used in reference to Jerusalem specifically. But I am open. Anybody want to take on any of these questions and investigate and correct me? That's what we're here for. We're a study group.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Just on that note, I mean, we have to show everybody the Monty Python clip about the Judean people's friend. That's just a required. If people haven't seen that, that's homework.
Yeah, I showed it when we were doing the history.
But I think it's good again. And you know, it's just interesting. You say we Christians, but Christ was Jewish. It's interesting. And, you know, if I'm still going to do a next week psychedelic interlude, because John and I discussed that, I know quite a bit more about the role of psychedelics, specifically the ergot alkaloids from the fermentation of rye and barley that are the roots of LSD, and that's clearly implicated in early Christianity. So they were a young experimenting group. Anyway,
yes. I accept all your amendments.
They were not alone. What, can you put the link to that YouTube video or at least some title?
So every session I videotape it, Susan, and then I send out the link to a larger group of people who don't attend, but I'll put that in the link along with the Mel Brooks link. I actually have it loaded up, but I don't think we're going to have time to get to it. So
John,
it's only 40 seconds. Yeah.
this is Harold. Just outside the Colosseum in the Forum, there's a triumphal arch, and inside the arch is a fresco or a carving showing the successful Romans bringing back all the trophies from the destruction of the Second Temple and the Jewish Empire at the time.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to the Jews of Rome in just a second. So
hold on, John. There though, because it's close to 1, and I think there's a lot of meat right here that's worth just discussing, because it's a very transitional time in the history of the Middle East.
okay,
it changes quite a bit.
Yes, it is. And maybe we could let me see if I can get through the Jews of Rome, David. So I've already talked about the Talmud. This is the Jews of Rome. There was a philosopher named Josephus. Now, I don't know if that's what you're referring to, Harold, but it's something that when I did a search for images, the Jews of Rome, and of course the Jews of Rome, the reform movements, they were treated very badly by the Romans, a lot of them. And some of them became and called themselves Christians. And this is Saint Peter, who was crucified upside down. And this is another depiction of what that might have looked like. And then we get to the Jewish diaspora. And so I am more than willing to stop here. This would be a natural place to stop. I've got about another 7 minutes just to finish.
John, wait, John. You've covered so much. I think it's a perfect stopping spot. And I just need to comment about reflecting Susan. All of those images of Christ in stone and painting and Caravaggio, those are white guys who were depicting what was probably a brown guy 1,500 years prior. So all that imagery, Judaism has no imagery. Anyway, I love what you've done, John. I'm so appreciative.
Okay. All right. So the floor is open. Homer.
Well, just because you said I'm going to be preparing a talk on Achilles or the Iliad, in high school, the book we read on Jewish history was entitled The Hebrew Iliad, a good book for a young Homer to read. I just looked it up. There's one copy available on the web.
Well, good.
That's the story of the migration of the Jewish people, the Iliad, of the Hebrew Iliad.
Ah, nice. Okay. Let me look at the chats and see if anything I should respond to. But anybody else?
So this is Carol. When they talk about Israel, is it always basically the same geographical region that they're talking about? How much of that expand and contract? And
actually, if you look at that map of the two kingdoms, it's mostly Judea, but there are certainly parts of southern Israel that are included. I think the Golan Heights for sure. So it gets all mismatched in history. And so if there's confusion about who belongs where, some of it is the division of the original two kingdoms that causes a problem. the original two kingdoms goes, halfway to halfway to Turkey. Yeah, I go.
So you're talking about the sea peoples, and that's the Philistines, and then finally the becoming Palestinians in the land of Canaan. Does that mean that today's Palestinians have some biological connection with the Greeks? If so, is there a linguistic or a cultural bridge there?
Okay, so I've looked at genetic links in other contexts, and especially with all the coming and going in this area, I would say no. Any links would be cultural. It's culture. It's what people believe is true, not what you can prove is true. And certainly in my case, looking at my so-called Irish roots, that turned out to not be pure at all. So any link I have with Scotland and the Gaels is purely cultural.
Yeah. John, hey, it's Pepper. The big thing I took from yesterday and again from today was the fact that the mountains and the coast are almost like two different people. Jerusalem has always been held in either Judea or by more what would be Jewish people historically. Some even stayed in that area. But the coast, which is flat, it's like LA versus the mountains. And that distinction and how close those two are, and yet how far apart they are, because on the one hand you had this kicked out war like people on boats, and on the other you had farmers, and in ways that's a metaphor for what's going on now, in some twisted Western capitalist way. But I just think for me it was a very big insight. I just want to thank you.
Yeah, no, that map, it's schematic, but it's educational.
When Israel was first formed back in 1948, they were socialists. They weren't capitalists. They were socialist, almost communist, and they still have a bunch of communes. So
I was going to say they're still socialists too. Many.
Yeah, Aiko and I, when we visited in 1971, went and lived on a kibbutz for 3 days, I think. So yeah, no, absolutely. How things have changed, right? Yeah. Carol sent me a wonderful article from Foreign Affairs. I think I sent it to everybody, didn't I? Written by Golda Meir on the history, it's amazing how much politics and ideology has changed. I think that is the immigration of the Russian Jews mainly. They're the most conservative, but correct me if I'm wrong.
What I find interesting about that point, John, is that my mother's uncles emigrated out of Russia in 1905 and 1907. During the pogroms, they went to Israel, and they founded some of the most left-wing kibbutzim in Israel at that point. And so here they are bringing socialism. They were very left-wing thinkers. And then the Russian Jews coming in recently, what I hear from other people in Israel is they're just flat out right wing.
Yeah. Interesting. I'll just point out to everybody who's hearing Irene for the first time in a while that her family came from Odessa. And when I get to the diaspora, whenever that's going to be, I'm going to just briefly show that the Jews were expelled from England around the time of the Crusades. They wound up in Polish Lithuania, which at the time was the largest country in Europe. And they worked their way down to Odessa, which was in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And when we visited Russia and went to the museum, there was a wonderful little section. Now, this was in 2016. There was a wonderful, I think so, a wonderful little section on, no, I'm sorry, that's wrong. We were in the Jewish Museum in Warsaw, and there is a wonderful little a diorama of a cafe in Odessa. And I'll try to, I took pictures of it. I'll try to find it. But you know, you had figurines, white statues, kind of ghosts, recreating a cafe, a Jewish cafe in Odessa.
Cool.
John, how does this work with, you have that great kind of topographical map of Israel in the coast and how limited it was before you got to the heights?
Yeah.
How do you relate that to sea level rise or sea level dropping?
Oh, boy. Go for it, John.
Hey, David, this is your bailiwick.
I was going to say, I can jump in on this one. We won't need to worry about that in our lifetimes. You know, that's up 50, 100 feet. We're talking, you know, yeah. So
there you have it from our Jewish water expert.
But wait a second, say that one again. So that the 400 feet didn't happen in this period, this time period.
Oh, you're saying thousands of years ago? Where was the coast? You mean like 2,000-3,000 years ago? That's a different question. I don't know. The other thing that it's hard to not mention is the foremost water experts in the world are in Israel, because of course they don't have a lot of water, as John mentioned.
Right.
A lot of it comes from the hills, and they are the foremost on desalination and conservation.
Right.
One quite quick story is one of my best friends was on kibbutz in Israel for many years at Netafim, which was a drip irrigation. His first wife and the mother of his child, who I grew up with, is now a captive in Gaza.
Oh,
Israel's a pretty small, and the Jewish country is a pretty small, tightly knit group. It's, you know, the whole population of Israel is like the Bay Area, but that's it. There's no New York, there's no Chicago, so everybody's there, or half the Jews now are in this country. But anyway, just that personal story, I think it's really important to, as we look at, hopefully with compassion, the way things are going in the world right now. Sorry.
Yeah, another personal story along those lines. When we traveled with a group tour in Egypt, we bonded with an avocado farmer in Ventura, and we liked them so much they invited us to come. We went and visited their avocado farm, and they had exclusive, and he was really proud of this, drip irrigation from Israel. It was spectacular. And he gave the statistics on how little water he used to grow avocados compared to his neighbors.
That's exactly what I was going to raise my hand about.
That's because our minds think alike, Aiko. We must have been married 57 years.
Good job on that.
Yeah.
Don't forget to introduce David for next week.
Yeah. Okay. So David mentioned, next week, David and I'll negotiate this. I'm glad I'm doing a big talk on the history of Martinus that is kind of growing out of control. So I'm a little bit nervous, but next week, I don't think it'll take me much time to get to Odessa. and how the Jews got to Odessa. And then David is going to take over and make a connection, which he started today, but between Christianity and hallucinogenics.
Do we get to sample them?
If you come to Oakland, mushrooms, you have to join the church.
No
But if you join the
problem.
Native American church, then
No
for a $50
problem.
donation, they'll give you a chocolate. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it on your own at home.
No, we're going to do it in your home.
Oh, well, we need, the home's getting rebuilt and afterward. And sure, am I doing that next week, John?
Yeah.
The hallucinogens?
Yeah, yeah, you're going to give David is going to be giving like a keynote talk, and I thought since I didn't want to have the burden of preparing anything new, that he would take over next week and build on that. We've already got a connection between this week's lecture and next week with Christianity, and I'll be here, but. And maybe if there's time, David and I'll work this out.
Wait, we'll be fine. I just want to tell everybody not to have any psychoactive compounds at all during the week. So no coffee, no alcohol, no tobacco, and just so your minds are clear.
Coffee?
Never have been.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much, John.
Okay. Anybody else? My pleasure.
Just
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Bye.